Ever wish you could just, download deep knowledge about really complex ancient mysteries, like a shortcut?
It's tempting, isn't it? Especially with subjects that feel dense.
Exactly. Well, today we're kind of doing that. We're embarking on a deep dive into something fascinating and honestly pretty debated, the ancient Har rituals. You probably know them as the sin offering, mainly from Leviticus. And you might think, okay, old rules, dusty texts. But they are packed with layers of meaning and a surprising amount of controversy that scholars are still wrestling with today.
Right. And our guide for this is actually a recent PhD dissertation. It's done a meticulous job analyzing these rituals, pulling together decades of scholarship. So our mission really is to unpack the core mechanics. How did ancient Israelites understand sin, impurity? How did they think they could purify, their sacred spaces and themselves?
And we'll definitely explore the different scholarly takes. Some are conflicting, but they're all pretty compelling in their own ways. It helps you grasp the nuances fast.
That's the goal.
And this isn't just some ancient history lesson, right? It's about tapping into that very human need for cleansing, for order, for connection, and seeing how different cultures grapple with these big ideas: moral impurity, ritual impurity. It gives context.
Absolutely crucial context.
Okay, so with all these layers, let's dive in. Why are these hard freight rituals, especially Leviticus 4, 5, and 16, why are they so hard to get a handle on? They look like detailed instructions.
Well, that's the core challenge, isn't it? Many scholars point out there's this lack of a single overarching conceptual framework for the whole priestly cult system.
The priestly cult system, just to clarify for everyone.
Right, yeah, that's basically the whole set of rituals, laws, practices about worship, interacting with God, mainly described by the priestly writers in the first 5 books of the Bible. And for a long time, research often focused on, say, literary criticism, how the texts were put together, or maybe just one specific type of offering.
So not the big picture.
Exactly. Not looking at the complete ritual system as a whole. And that naturally led to a kind of fragmented understanding.
Makes sense.
And adding to that is the ambiguity in the text. They don't always spell out the symbolism. Do this, do that. But not always why. So interpreters, us included, have to infer meanings, which means the function of an element can be complex, context-dependent.
So because it's ambiguous, scholars use all sorts of different lenses. You mentioned task-oriented approaches.
Yeah, like Jacob Milgram, focusing on the desired effect, the basic system.
And symbolic approaches,
Yeah.
trying to connect ritual details to, well, life outside the ritual.
Right, linking it to broader worldviews.
But what about that really surprising view you mentioned, the idea of ritual meaninglessness? What's that about? How does that fit in?
That's a fascinating fringe, perhaps, but important viewpoint. It basically challenges the whole idea of finding symbolic meaning everywhere. It suggests maybe the actions themselves are just prescribed actions. You do them because they're commanded, not because each step has a hidden semantic meaning.
Like following a recipe without knowing the chemistry?
Sort of, yeah. It highlights just how difficult these texts are and the sheer range of ways scholars try to make sense of them, from deep symbolism to, well, maybe it's just about the doing.
Okay, so diving deeper into that enigma. One of the biggest debates, you said, is right at the start. How does the sanctuary, the sacred stuff, actually get polluted by sin in the first place? 2 main conflicting ideas here.
Indeed, this is a major point of contention. Theory 1, really pushed by scholars like Jacob Milgram, is what you could call automatic, distance pollution.
Automatic, even from far away.
That was his argument. Sin inherently contaminates the sanctuary like he put it, a miasma or a poisonous vapor, even if the sin happens miles away.
Wow.
He famously used the analogy of Dorian Gray's picture. The sanctuary, like the portrait, just passively accumulates the people's sin defilement over time, so it needs regular cleaning.
Okay. Dorian Gray. Got it. And others supported this?
Yes. Nobuyoshi Kyuchi is another prominent scholar who argued for a similar kind of distant automatic pollution.
All right, so that's one camp. What's the opposing view?
The opposing view, often found among, say, American Adventist Old Testament scholars, and also some Jewish scholars, is that hand-laying transfers the pollution.
Hand-laying? You mean the onsu ritual?
Exactly. Onsu, the laying on of hands. They propose that the sin, or maybe the consequence of the sin, is physically transferred from the person offering the sacrifice to the animal when they lay hands on it.
How would that work?
Well, someone like Angel Rodriguez broke it down, suggesting it could happen through lawful entry, bringing a sacrifice for a forgivable sin, or unlawful entry, like entering improperly without a sacrifice for serious sins. And some Jewish scholars, like Noam Zohar, took it further. He theorized that hand-laying transfers the sin's impurity to the animal's nephesh, its life force or soul.
The nefesh.
Yes. And then, through the animal's blood and flesh touching the altar, that impurity directly pollutes the sacred objects. It's a much more direct physical transfer model.
Okay, so automatic miasma versus physical transfer via hands. But the dissertation we're looking at, it critiques that hand-laying idea, right? Says it's maybe applied too broadly.
Precisely. The author, Seong Ki-mun, argues that reading hand-laying as always transferring sin is probably an over-application. It seems to have that specific function in Leviticus 16, the Day of Atonement context, but it's not consistently presented that way for all sacrifices.
So it's not the universal mechanism.
Doesn't seem to be. And crucially, the dissertation emphasizes that confession of sin is presented as the key prerequisite for forgiveness, almost regardless of the hand-laying interpretation.
Ah, so the internal state, the confession, is primary. That shifts the focus a bit from just the physical action.
Exactly. It suggests sin's power to pollute is inherent, and addressing it requires more than just a ritual touch. It requires acknowledgement, confession, alongside the ritual act.
Okay, that's a really helpful clarification on the pollution debate. Let's shift now to the solution part, the blood. Its role is obviously huge, everyone agrees on that, but how it works, another big debate.
Absolutely central, yes. And debated. Again, Jacob Milgram had a very specific view. For him, the blood's only function was purification.
Only purification.
Yes. Purifying the sanctuary objects from that accumulated sin miasma we talked about. He famously called blood a ritual detergent, just washing the sacred space clean.
A detergent, okay. But others disagreed.
Strongly. Many scholars, Kiyuchi, Makobi, Roy Gain, among others, argue pretty successfully against Milgram on this. They propose a dual function for the blood.
Dual function meaning?
Meaning it does two things. Yes, it purifies the contaminated sanctuary, but it also provides expiation, or ransom, for the sinner. It deals with both the space and the person.
Ah, okay. Cleansing and atoning.
Exactly. And that dual function view, it's gained a lot more consensus now. William Gilders even suggested tweaking the metaphor, maybe disinfectant rather than detergent.
Disinfectant, implying it destroys impurity, not just washes it.
That's the idea. A subtle but significant difference in how you imagine the blood working.
That is fascinating. And thinking of comparisons, other ancient Near Eastern cultures used blood in purification, right? Like the Hittite Yilipi ceremony.
They did, yes. Blood for cleansing is found elsewhere.
But the dissertation points out a key difference, doesn't it? About what happens to the blood after the ritual.
It does, and it's a crucial point. In many Mesopotamian rituals, for instance, the cleansing agent, whatever it was typically removed, disposed of outside the sacred area afterwards. Get rid of the dirty stuff.
Right.
But in Leviticus, particularly with the Had, the blood often remains on the sacred objects, the altar horns, the veil, or it's disposed of within the sacred precinct, like at the base of the altar.
So it stays within the holy zone. What does that difference suggest? Is it doing something more permanent than just cleaning?
That's exactly the implication the dissertation draws out. The fact that the blood stays suggests it's not just a temporary cleanse, it's performing a deeper, maybe transformative function. It's not just washing off dirt. It's possibly restoring sanctity, maybe even infusing the object with the power of the atonement it represents. It's a lasting effect integrated into the sacred space itself.
Wow, okay. That changes how you picture it.
And the dissertation gets really specific about the application. It looks at the different Hebrew verbs used.
Like
hizah, which is often translated as sprinkling or maybe splashing. You see that for blood on the mercy seat or the veil inside the Holy of Holies on Yom Kippur. Very sacred, very precise. Then there's natan, which means more like applying, placing, or pouring, used for dabbing blood on the altar horns for certain sins, or pouring it at the base.
So the different actions weren't random?
Not at all. Each method and location seems tied to a specific purpose, a specific level of purification or atonement needed for that part of the sanctuary or for that particular sin. It's incredibly meticulous.
Okay, meticulous application. But what about leftover blood? You mentioned pouring it at the base of the altar in Leviticus 4. That's seen as just disposal, right? Non-atoning.
Generally, yes. Pouring the remainder at the base of the outer altar seems to be a way to dispose of blood that's fulfilled its primary atoning function elsewhere, keeping it within the sacred bounds but not using it for further specific atonement.
But interestingly, Leviticus 16, the Day of Atonement chapter, it doesn't explicitly mention that step, does it? Pouring out the remainder.
It doesn't, no. And the dissertation suggests this omission is significant. For Yom Kippur, the entire ritual is so comprehensive, covering the innermost sanctuary, that likely all the blood brought inside had a specific, potent ritual purpose.
So no mere leftovers on that day.
Probably not in the same sense. Every drop was part of that total cleansing and atonement for the entire system. The main point, whether poured at the base or applied meticulously, is about managing this potent substance, the blood, correctly. Its proper handling, its containment within sacred boundaries was essential to prevent misuse, sacrilege, or the uncontrolled spread of either holiness or impurity. Ritual order was paramount.
Ritual order. Okay, so we've covered pollution, we've covered blood. Let's move to the flesh of the hot animal, what happens to the meat. Another area with some nuanced interpretations.
Definitely nuanced. One view, again following Milgram's logic, was that the flesh actually absorbed the sin's impurity. It acted like a sponge, soaking up the contamination.
So the meat itself becomes sinful.
That was the idea for some. However, the dissertation argues against this pretty strongly. It finds no real textual evidence that the hariyat meat uniquely contains sin, or that burning it is specifically about incinerating sin. Instead, it points out that all sacrificial meat burned on the altar, regardless of the type of sacrifice, is said to produce a pleasing aroma to God.
Ah, so the burning wasn't just about destroying sin, but a general act of offering.
Exactly. A general purpose of devotion, offering sustenance symbolically to God, creating that connection through the rising smoke.
Okay. But not all the meat was burned on the altar. What were the other disposal methods?
Right. For many har offerings, the priests actually ate the meat.
They ate the sin offering.
Yes. And often this is seen simply as their due compensation for their ritual labor, like an agency fee, you could say, similar to how they receive portions of other offerings.
Makes practical sense. But there's that tricky verse, Leviticus 10.17, where it sounds like eating the meat does something more.
Ah, yes. That's a key text in this debate. Leviticus 10.1 describes the priests eating the hot meat as a way to bear the iniquity of the congregation and make atonement for them.
Bear the iniquity. That sounds like they are taking on the sin somehow.
It sounds like it, but the dissertation offers a different reading. It argues bearing the iniquity here isn't about the priests physically absorbing sin like a sponge. Rather, it's about their mediating role. By consuming the sacred portion within the holy precinct, they are participating in and completing the atonement process. Their authorized consumption makes the congregation's forgiveness ritually effective.
I see. So it's part of their priestly function, finalizing the ritual, not becoming polluted themselves.
That's the argument. It's about enacting the atonement, not absorbing the sin.
Okay. And the third option, sometimes the meat wasn't burned on the altar or eaten by priests.
Correct. For those half-at offerings where the blood was brought inside the sanctuary tent itself, like for sins of the high priest, or the whole community in Leviticus 4, or on the Day of Atonement in Leviticus 16.
The really serious ones involving the inner spaces.
Exactly. For those, the remaining flesh, the carcass, couldn't be eaten. It had to be taken outside the camp to a designated clean place and burned completely.
Why the difference? Why burn it outside?
Because that blood had contacted the holiest areas, dealing with the most severe impurities. The flesh associated with that blood was therefore considered extremely potent, perhaps dangerously so.
Too hot to handle, ritually speaking.
You could put it that way. Burning it outside prevented any improper contact, ensuring that this intense level of absorbed impurity or perhaps residual holiness didn't spread inappropriately within the camp.
So again, it comes back to maintaining boundaries.
Precisely. The dissertation concludes that the ultimate goal, whether eating, burning on the altar, or burning outside, was always about proper disposal, preventing the uncontrolled spread of holiness or impurity beyond their designated ritual boundaries, keeping everything in its proper place and state.
Maintaining order and separation makes sense. Okay, this brings us perfectly to the grand finale, doesn't it? Leviticus 16. The Day Atonement, Yom Kippur, the ultimate, most comprehensive purification. What new light does the dissertation shed on this incredibly important day?
It offers some really crucial context. It argues, very persuasively I think, that the immediate backdrop for Leviticus 16 isn't just general sin, but the specific crisis in Leviticus 10.
The Nadab and Abihu incident, Aaron's sons.
Exactly. When Nadab and Abihu offered strange fire, unauthorized incense, and were struck dead right there in the sanctuary, their deaths, happening inside the tent of meeting, caused a profound, unprecedented level of impurity. It wasn't just about removing corpses. Their unauthorized fatal act deeply defiled the sacred space itself.
So Yom Kippur was, in a way, a response to that specific crisis. to make the sanctuary usable again.
That's the idea. It created an urgent need for a purification ritual, powerful enough to cleanse the entire system, from the Holy of Holies outward, making it safe for God's presence to dwell there after such a catastrophic breach.
Wow. That adds a whole layer of drama and necessity to it.
And this is the ritual with the 2 goats, right?
Famously, yes. One goat is designated as the Haret sacrifice. It's blood used for the sanctuary purification we've been discussing. It's slain. The other is the famous scapegoat, or the Azazel goat. Aaron confesses all the sins of the Israelites over its head, symbolically transferring them, and then it's sent away, alive, into the wilderness.
Taking the sins with it.
Literally carrying them away. And the dissertation points out the parallel with the ritual for cleansing skin diseases in Leviticus 14, which also uses 2 birds, 1 killed, 1 release.
Ah, right. That theme of substitution and removal again. Exactly. It shows a consistent ritual logic. One element deals with purification through blood, the other deals with removal of the impurity itself.
And the high priest's role on this day is huge.
Immense. Aaron, or the high priest, performs all these hot rituals personally. He atones for the Holy of Holies, the tent of meeting, the outer altar, and for all the people, covering everything.
For their impurities, transgressions, and sins, the text says. Now that specific list, impurities, transgressions, sins, is that another point scholars debate? What exactly do those terms cover?
It is. Some scholars, again like Milgram, tried to differentiate them sharply. He argued that transgressions, meaning deliberate rebellion, were particularly potent contaminants. But the dissertation offers, I think, a more straightforward reading here.
Which is?
It suggests these 3 terms, impurities, transgressions, sins, aren't necessarily distinct categories causing different types of pollution. Instead, they're likely parallel expressions.
Just different ways of saying all the bad stuff.
Essentially, yes, covering the whole spectrum. They describe the various forms of impurity and failure, ritual mistakes, unintentional errors, deliberate sins, all of which affect the sanctuary and the relationship with God.
So Yom Kippur wipes the slate clean for everything.
That's the picture. It's an annual comprehensive spiritual reset for the entire community and its sacred space. All forms of defilement are dealt with.
And the dissertation puts this in a wider context too, right? Comparing it to other ancient festivals.
Yes, and this is really illuminating. It highlights Yom Kippur's function as an annual festival focused on purification and, crucially, covenant renewal. It draws parallels with similar annual purification rites and covenant renewal ceremonies found in other ancient Near Eastern cultures, like the Zukri festival in Imar or the Nansha New Year festival in Mesopotamia.
So this wasn't just a one-off emergency measure, but became an essential yearly event.
Exactly. It became embedded as a vital, recurring mechanism to ensure the ongoing purity of the sanctuary, the people, and thus maintain the covenant relationship, allowing God's continued presence among them. It was fundamental to their worldview.
Wow. Okay, so stepping back from all these intricate details, what does this deep dive mean for us, trying to understand these ancient practices?
Well, we've journeyed through this really complex world of the heart. We've seen these intense scholarly debates. How does sin pollute? How do blood and flesh cleanse? What's the ultimate meaning of Yom Kippur?
It's definitely not simple.
Not at all. And the disagreements between brilliant scholars like Milgram, Kiuchi, Gane, Rodriguez, Zohar, they aren't failures, are they? They actually show how rich and complex these ancient texts really are.
Yeah, they force you to think more critically.
Exactly. They challenge us. How did people back then really conceive of the relationship between actions, intentions, substances, and the sacred? It's fascinating. This deep dive really shows how focused scholarship, like in this dissertation, can peel back layers and layers of meaning.
It's pretty amazing, actually, how much intense thought goes into understanding what looks like, just a set of instructions. It reveals such a dynamic and honestly sophisticated system for thinking about purity, consequences, and how you restore things.
It really does.
And that understanding feels relevant even now.
I think so. And as we consider all of the meticulous details, the profound ideas behind these ancient purification rites, maybe it leaves us and you listening with a question to ponder.
Oh!
How do societies, ancient and modern, define what constitutes impurity or sin? What things disrupt harmony or order? And maybe more importantly, what rituals, what processes, formal or informal, do societies create to address that disruption, to cleanse, to restore balance?
That's a great question. What are modern purification rites?
It's something that definitely resonates far beyond the ancient tent of meeting, doesn't it?
Yeah.